The peninsula of Seren is a land dominated by conflict. Only now, after 200 years, has the land settled into a relative peace. However, trouble still looms across the land. In the north, beyond the mountains, monsters gather their strength and bide their time. Far to the east, an ancient evil, long thought beaten, stirs again. And in the west, a new lord takes control, seemingly beneficial, but is he all that he truly appears to be? This is a land of strife, a land in trouble, a land for heroes.
Oh man, that was the cringiest thing I've ever done. And that's saying something. Anyways, moving on. This group, which I refer to as the Eastern Group, is going to be taking place in the eastern part of the Seren Peninsula. Right here, as you can see. Yes, with that great evil that the narrator so helpfully mentioned. The party, who I'll get to in just a moment, started on the road to the small village of Orlane from the town of Voxlealen. Each of the party members had been asked by their friend, the Archmage Vargasel of the Mages Guild, to find a missing explorer by the name of Duven Stall. He had gone missing in the area of the village of Orlane, and so Archmage Vargasel was worried about him. Duven has been missing for a little over a week, and so his friend, the Archmage, was worried about him, hence why he asked the adventurers to go find him. And the village of Orlane is a small little hamlet on the outskirts of the entire region. Pretty much no one's even heard of it by this point. Nobody even really cares about it. It's about 3 or 4 days travel outside of the central town. Beyond that, the party knows very little about the region or where they're going into. One of them came from the far north and only arrived here recently. One of them came from the far west and has no real grounding. And the third player of this starting group was a machine that was enacted by the Mages Guild to help out. So we'll get to all of them in just a moment. The first player I'll get into is Geoff Highhill, the Halfling Ranger with a brazen disposition who is currently on the hunt for vengeance against a dragon who killed his parents and razed his entire hometown. So his main personal quest, you could say, is to find the dragon who killed the hometown. He is currently played by my very younger brother Riley. Next we have Bruce Bannon, the human druid with a drinking problem who believes himself to be a major player in the final battle between the old faith of nature and the new gods who have currently come onto the scene. He is currently trying to gather power, bide his time, and wait for a signal from his faith that it is time to act, one way or the other. He is played by my friend Paul. This is the first time I've ever played with Paul, but he seems to be quite a bit of a veteran, so he's coming into this with quite a bit of experience. Third character is played by my friend Scott. He wanted to play a Warforged Gunslinger from 200 years ago. There's always one in every group, isn't there? There's always one player who wants to play the one-armed pixie barbarian, or the minotaur magician, or something like that. There's always one weird one, isn't there? At least that's what I've noticed so far in my time. Anyways, into his backstory. The Gunslinger is named Hoss, and he was created many years ago in a very different time by a pair of magicians. I should just call them mages, but the mages who were hoping to have an assistant, somebody who could keep up with them, help with the gear and the memory and fighting and all that sort of stuff. So he has been reawakened recently, developed a personality, and is currently on a little bit of a mission to design a certain something. Now, as I said before, this session starts off with 3 players. About 1 or 2 sessions in, we add in a 4th, but we'll get to him when he shows up. For now, it's the three of these people: Gunslinger, Druid, and Ranger. They start on the path to the village of Orlane with a quest already in hand. This is referred to as in medias res, and I'll cover it at the end of this video. while they are on their way towards this small village, they are attacked by a small band of ambushing orange-skinned, slightly scaly, lizard-like creatures running around in barely any armor and wielding puny daggers and small slings. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, you can pretty quickly recognize what it is. This is one of my favorite creatures. It's one of the major things I love to play, especially when it's run by a DM called Tucker, because let me tell you, those little bastards can really, really mess up your day if you're dealing with those. Anyways, after the battle, which wasn't too intense, it was a medium to hard encounter, wasn't difficult. A couple of traps, a couple of surprise twists using entangle and all that sort of fun stuff. I think it was a good fight. After the battle, some of the kobolds escaped, and the party continued to move on towards the village. This was a bit of a slow session, and it was honestly kind of thrown together at the last second, because I had planned not to do this in medias res. I was planning on doing this in a standard sort of way, where each member of the party is brought before Vargasel, and he asks them to undertake this quest to find this guy, and he was going to have a personal connection to each player. Problem is that I created this with 2 players in mind. Both of them wanted to be mages, and then I added in the 4th player, and then we got in talking with this player, and he joined in, and then these 2 dropped out, which then caused me to lose a lot of my traction. Having dropped off the 2 mages, having someone who was created by the Mages Guild but didn't really have any sort of stance, and then the Druid, who would only make sense in the scene that I'd created for a Druid, I felt it was unnecessary and really kind of weird to try and put that back together with half of it being in shambles. So instead, I went with a more traditional in medias res approach. This guy asked you to do this thing, you already said yes, we're going. Now we get to the DM section, where I want to talk real briefly about that sort of thing. This is referred to as I've mentioned, in medias res. It's already started. It skips a lot of the sort of establishments and the motivation. It sort of causes things to happen immediately. Generally, I'm a little bit more of a fan of what's more referred to as a slow burn, where you introduce the characters, you introduce them into a neutral setting, and then you introduce some change, which they, if they're good players, will agree to. The classic example of this is you all start in a tavern. That's a slow burn. There's also 2 other methods which I'd like to discuss real quickly. There's the hot start and the cold open. So, slow burn, you all start in a tavern. In medias res, you're already on the quest. The hot start is, the best way I can put it is if you've ever watched James Bond. Every single one of James Bond's movies I've ever seen, I believe, starts with a hot start. Particularly the Pierce Brosnans. They open with James Bond halfway through a mission, and he finishes up the mission, and he escapes on a motorcycle and jumps off the motorcycle onto a helicopter, which then takes off and away from the exploding Russian military base. That is a hot start. Introduce the character immediately in the middle of his conclusion to an adventure. That way you can learn a little bit about him, see some cool action, and then you move on to a slower scene where he is introduced into the situation at hand. I've always thought that would be kind of cool, but that's the kind of setup you would want to use for something more along the lines of a mid-level campaign start, or like a one-shot, where it's like, all right, you guys are a group of adventurers, and you just finished up this quest, and now you're going to move on to the next quest. Much like James Bond himself, really. He's probably like a level 20 by this point. The 4th example is what's called a cold open. I've been meaning to try a cold open on some of my players. I meant to do it in a different campaign, but that fell through for various reasons. Basically, a cold open is no players, just a scene that helps establish why the plot is happening. Now, a good example of this is pretty much every single House episode. House MD usually starts with you follow the patient around, the patient suddenly becomes ill, drops, and then gets dragged off to the hospital, and that's where House and the team show up. They're the players. House and the team are the players. So you have cold open where there's no influence by the players. It just sort of establishes the plot. This is what happens, and then we introduce the players who are going to try and solve this problem. Now, in one of my campaigns, the one I mentioned before, my plan had been for the first session to be the players not as the players. They were going to be guardsmen in a fortress in the mountains guarding a pass. And they were going to get attacked by kobolds, and they were going to have a little side mission. They have to go light the beacon and warn everybody. and it was going to be up to them whether or not they succeeded. They were going to have to fight a lot of kobolds. There was going to be undead who showed up, battering ram at the gate. It was going to be this big epic fight against these 8 guardsmen, 4 of them controlled by players. The other 4, 2 of them get dropped immediately. The other 2 are kind of cowards and run, that kind of thing. And this huge mass of an assaulting raid that just attacks. That is an example of a cold open because the player characters are not in the scene. The players are controlling some good NPCs, but in general, the scene plays out according to what the players do. That's wrong. The scene plays out of absent player character influence. That's a distinguishing mark of a cold open. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the beginning of this campaign diary, what I refer to as the Eastern campaign. Much like most of these campaign diary openers, I'm sure it's going to be a little bit slow in the start because I have to establish the characters, and that's a lot of talking about the backstories that they've introduced to me already and what they know about the area, so that way you know what they know and trying to keep everything together. But next session, a lot of things happen, so hopefully things will pick up really quickly. As far as I can tell, honestly, once we get this ball rolling, it should roll really fast. So, I hope I kept your interest at least a little bit. I hope to see you guys at the next campaign diary, which should be in a week, maybe less. And I'll see you guys in the next session. Take care.